Well, Sami Hamdi is the editor of International Interest and joins us now from London. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. We had a sense there from that report of just how complicated the situation in Libya is. But how seriously should we take this warning of possible civil war?
It's not even a case of whether it's a warning of a civil war. Libya is, in fact, in a civil war at this moment in time. And it's not just between two parties. It's not just between the government in Tripoli and the government in Tobruk, but even between the individual militias, the militias of Benghazi and Misrata, in Zintan, who still hold Saif al-Islam Gaddafi and refuse to hand him over because to keep him is a very effective bargaining chip. You have the tribes in the south who simply refuse to acknowledge either government, which is one of the reasons why both parties are very keen to gain that territory in the south and have found a reason to go into that territory and actually fight. So I think in de facto terms, Libya is currently in a civil war and has been for some time.
And it's a fairly familiar picture, isn't it, with the fall of a strongman, in this case Gaddafi, it turns out has held a nation together. What are the possibilities for Libya to restore some equilibrium and become a normal country again?
I think one of the interesting things is that the way that Sarraj has called for international intervention, whereas one of Libya's deepest problems is the fact that there already is international intervention. You have nations supporting Tobruk and nations supporting Tripoli, and both sides telling the other not to agree. I think with regards to Sarraj's call for international intervention, I think it's very interesting because it's not simply to find some sort of political solution with Tobruk, but Sarraj has been marred by the fact that militias in Tripoli itself refused to acknowledge his authority, such as the likes of Ghouail, for example. They refused to acknowledge a UN-brokered agreement. In terms of finding a political solution, in terms of your question as to the various solutions to Libya, the reality on the ground seems to suggest that there has to be a decisive military victory for one of the forces, whether that's Khalifa Haftar's forces in Tobruk or whether the militias that are involved in Tripoli. So I think it is very complex. I don't see what international intervention would do. Many in Libya would say that it is the NATO intervention itself, as opposed to the toppling of Gaddafi, that has brought about this problem by arming an entire population. So I think it is very complex, as you said. It is very difficult. There doesn't seem to be a solution in sight. And there doesn't even seem to be a powerful party that is capable of taking control of Libya at this particular moment in time.
And it seems sometimes for the international community, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. They've been criticised for not intervening in Syria. Do you think there's regret that they've intervened in Libya, or have they just not done it in the correct way?
I think with regards to international community, we have to remember what the situation was in Libya before NATO intervened. You had a strongman dictator, tyrant, opening fire on his own people and killing them indiscriminately. I think if you were Obama at the time or anybody, it's kind of difficult to just stand by and do nothing. I think the problem with the international community, the intervention, was that each party that got involved had various different interests. For example, Italy is only really interested in the north, in the export of the oil in the north. You have the British, who are more concerned with the infrastructure projects, and the French. You had the US, who are more interested in making sure that terrorism doesn't emerge or the Iraq scenario doesn't happen again. And as a result, these various different competing interests and competing goals meant that they had to support different factions on the Libyan political scene, which meant that the Libyan factions couldn't agree on themselves. I mean, let's remember, there was an election in Tripoli that most of the political factions rejected after the results came out because it didn't suit their particular interest. And as a result, it descended into civil war. So I don't think it's necessarily a regret. I think it's just the reality of international politics and the reality of the very deep oppression with which Gaddafi ruled Libya over 40 years that has suddenly exploded like a Pandora's box.
Sami, thank you very much for that fascinating analysis of the situation in Libya. Thank you very much indeed.